Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org.
Hello, my name is Brian Mercer with Author Magazine. Today I'm speaking with Jamie Butler, spirit communicator and author of With Love and Light, True Stories About an Uncommon Gift. Hello, Jamie, and welcome back to Author Magazine.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Hello.
I've been describing your book to people because it's a wonderful book. It's kind of a memoir, kind of Q&A plus stories from your clients. And so you're a spirit communicator. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
It is a little bit of everything. It's not just communicating audio with someone who has passed over, but it's also the ability of feeling it, seeing it, and hearing it, for me at least.
You can see spirits, is that correct? Safe to say? You can see and hear them?
Yes, so if we wanted to call them by their common appropriate name, it would be the clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentience.
So I'm trying to get a sense of what life is like for you. So when I read your book, and I have a sense of what that's like, and of course you have the Hollywood version of what this type of phenomenon is like. You have a story at the very beginning of your book where you're in a restaurant and you see a man standing next to your table, and you're like kind of getting annoyed, like, who is this guy? And it sounds like it's just like a normal person. You can't see through him. You can hear him speaking. Is that what it's like?
Often it does come across like that. In that story, I was talking about being in a New York restaurant, and it was pretty dim, and there was tons of activity going on. It was a very hip place, and I couldn't differentiate if he was one of the waiters. He was kind of wearing similar clothing. So out of your peripheral vision, I just logged him as a waiter. And why was he coming to the table but not really asking for anything? And then it dawned on me, seconds later, that this is not a waiter. This is someone who has crossed over, who has, I guess, seen the sign, apparently, that I carry over my head that says, "I see dead people." And he had come to the table to get some help. And you mentioned, how is it to have this gift? It's interesting because I still see myself as an ordinary person. And then all of a sudden I have this extraordinary perception that comes along with it. And what kind of puts someone like me in a box, and I know that there are many other people out there who are similar or very much identical to myself, is that we don't have the language to communicate to others that what's happening to us, for us, is very common. And growing up with it, I almost rely on those senses as much as I would rely on the five senses that we were taught to use growing up. For myself, growing up with it, I don't really know what to compare it to.
I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say you're sitting around and reading a book. Could you just all of a sudden hear a disembodied voice just out of nowhere? Does that happen?
How about this one? I was at Publix, I think this was a year ago, which is a grocery store here in the Southeast, and I was shopping for grapefruit. And this woman said behind me, "Oh, I always pick a grapefruit by the way that it smells." And I say back to her without turning around, "Oh yeah, my mother taught me how to squeeze them to feel if they were ripe." And she laughed, and I turned around to carry on the conversation with her, and no one is around me. No one physically is there. So I did this kind of panic thing, and I put my hand over my ear like I had some Bluetooth element in it, and I was like, "Oh, yes, thank you very much for the advice. I'll talk to you later." And I pretend to put it in my pocket because it had just taken me by such surprise. I wasn't calling it in. I wasn't asking for it, but she was nice enough to give me some advice on how to shop for grapefruit.
That was a quick move. That was good
Yes.
quick thinking. You can do that now, can't you? So do you ever get used to that, or is it always kind of scaring the crap out of you when that kind of thing happens?
I guess I've gotten used to the voices, because when you hear a voice and you don't see where it's coming from, you can imagine that it's far away or that, it can't really touch you. The things that get to me is, we have a spirit here in my house that I live in Atlanta, and he is not very friendly, and he looks very 3D, very real, and he stands in a certain dark place around a tiny little hallway. And sometimes I'll book around the hallway to get to the guest bedroom, and there he stands. And it just, my gut reacts, everything reacts. Sometimes I've dropped things. My daughter, for the longest time, wouldn't even walk down the hall. We'd had to carry her. She was picking up on it. And as we say in the South, bless his heart. He's not going anywhere, and he's staying here, and he won't talk to me, and I don't really know what to do for him. So we call him our roommate.
Do you have a sense of what time period he's from?
Oh, God, yes, I do. Our house was built in 1930, and we're right on Piedmont Park, and there's a huge festival, well, plenty, but this elderly woman was walking by one day and said, my grandmother used to live in that house. And she went on about her grandmother, and I just kind of looked at her and I said, what about your grandfather? She goes, no, he never got the chance to move in. He committed suicide right before the family was supposed to move in. He lost all his money in the Great Depression. I said, what does he look like? And she just kind of looked at me oddly and began to describe him. And then in her southern flair said, oh, you look like you've seen a ghost. And I said, I think I have. Would you mind coming into my home and telling your grandfather to move on? And she took it with stride and giggled, and I explained more about his personality and how he walked and what he looked like. And she said, my God, you've seen my grandpa.
Wow.
I said, yeah. So we know who he is. His name is Sam. We know how he's passed on. But for some reason, this is the last thing he purchased. It's the last thing he did on life, is this house. And we still have him around every now and then.
That's interesting, because I get a sense of, from reading stories about, we'll call him a ghost, but a spirit that lingers on, is that they stick around in one place, and it seems kind of boring. It seems like, well, you might want to, I don't know, go somewhere more interesting, at least a little once in a while. But is it not that way?
I know. I tried to tell him about Disney World and all these great things.
Right, exactly. Nothing. And you can see people's auras too, right, of the living.
Yes, the energetic field that shines off any living object, and also they shine off inanimate objects as well.
I've noticed that. I can see auras if I look for them. I think the most beautiful aura I have ever seen, it was one. My parents have these 250-year-old black walnut trees, and the auras coming from this tree is just amazing. But when I look at auras, I only just see a very thin. Generally, it's just a thin to maybe a little bit of a larger color around someone's. Usually, it's around their head or around their upper body.
Yeah.
But if I'm really trying, it's usually when I'm bored. But if I'm really trying to, I can see, kind of bloom out and maybe get a sense of more layers. For you, what is that like? Is it on all the time, and is it like beautiful multi-layered thing, or what is it like?
It used to be on all the time as a child and throughout college, until I met this woman, Marguerite Romez, who took me under her wing and really taught me how to turn it off. And it took about 2 years to stop looking at them and unfocus my eyes in a certain way to where they wouldn't glare so much. So now I feel like I can really go out into the world and not have all these lights and colors and pretty things. Or I can drive my car and not see the lights off the car in front of me and the trees whizzing by. There was a point where you would get used to it, but at the same time, it's giving you so much information that you're not asking for. And so it's simpler to dumb it down and just see the objects and the people themselves and not the energy that they're radiating. But, Brian, you made a really good point, is that when you were bored, you could see them easier, which is so, so true. When you get tired, and in college, I'm born vegetarian. I have this allergy to animal protein, which is very strange, but some of us have it. But I found in the meat section at grocery stores, they have that awful fluorescent lighting. And people would stand still just long enough, to look for that perfect slice or cut of meat. And I would stand there and pretend to shop for meat and stare at them like at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night when I was a little tired but needed that awful lighting to really make it all enhance.
Right.
And for me, you could see several layers, or sometimes it would come across like a watercolor painting where they would blob into each other. But there was no material, nothing, no books. No one really in the States that was standing up and saying, oh, the light that shines off of people has a meaning. It actually gives information. It's there for a purpose. As a college student, it was coming across as, well, this is better than LSD. People were doing these drugs to see these things, and I was seeing them without it. It was interesting for my friends. So I started to think of places where people would talk to me without questioning what I was doing. And I found out that bars and airports were the perfect places. And I wasn't old enough to drink, but I would just, sneak in, slip in, drink water, and look at the lights around them, document where they were layered, how they were shining, and what the texture of the light was. Because I found out they all meant something different. Then I would ask them, so what are you doing with life? What's going on? And I would just meet a stranger and talk about their lives, and I would find similar patterns to the colors that were on them. And airports were wonderful. And that was back in the day where you could go straight to the gate and not have a ticket.
Right, right.
People didn't mind. They were coming and going. I was just some little blonde-haired kid. What was I going to do? And they would share really deep stories. And I would document them after they left and have these notebooks of color patterns and what they meant. But luckily today we have wonderful authors and material from all over the world.
And I find that blue is a pretty common color that I see quite a bit. Is that like a sky blue? Is that just a coincidence, or?
Oh, for Americans, we tend to carry a lot of blue and yellow.
Yeah,
yellow
those are the two colors.
Yellow seems to be the strongest. As American culture, we're really grounded in the solar plexus. But the blue represents all the communication, the marketing, the social media, the reaching out into the environment is the sky blue.
Yeah, that's it, sky blue. That's what I see often. So at the very beginning of your story, you talk about being a child and having the ability to communicate with spirits, and then as far as your parents were concerned, this was kind of like you interacting with imaginary friends, and they kind of discouraged the behavior, and then it kind of went away, and then sometime later it came back. These abilities came back to you. Can you describe a little bit about that process?
Well, as a kid, when you're experiencing something that's always been there, like your parents, you never feel like they're out of place, right? They're common to you. It's fine, safe. And that's how my spirit friends were. All my imaginary friends, as my mother would call them, they were safe to me. They taught me so much about life. And when my mother made it clear that I needed to say goodbye to them, and they honored that and they left. So from 6 to 18, I wasn't engaging with them anymore. Most of my abilities were through dream state or just knowing things in my head right before they would happen. And when I moved away to college, I was 18, and I met this woman, Marguerite Romes, who quickly became my teacher. And everything came back. I started to see them. I started to hear them, not just with this internal ear where we have this inner voice. They were outside of my head talking to me. They stood outside of me and engaged with me. I had no idea really what to do. For the first time, I realized what I was doing as a kid really wasn't what everybody else in the world was experiencing, like I thought they were. I didn't know how to speak with them. They scared me more than they calmed me. I remember there were several nights I would sit against the wall on the floor with my fingers in my ears, and I would just rock, and I would tell them, go away, go away, go away, go away, go away. And I'd wake up in the morning, curled up on the floor next to the wall. The interesting thing, though, is all they were doing is standing in front of me just saying, we love you, I love you, it's okay, it's okay. Everything is okay. But it's like they wouldn't give up on me. They didn't leave me. They stayed and freaked me out.
Right, sure.
and told me these loving things. I just did not know how to describe that anymore as an adult, a young adult.
And again, they were as real to you as anyone else, or could you tell that this was something different?
It was something different. There were many occasions where they would show up and they looked just like a human being, and they would grab me at night and wake me up and tell me messages and tell me to get up, that they needed to talk to me, that I needed to do something. So I started sleeping with bats, with vacuum cleaner extensions, anything that could give me a far reach just to kind of throw it out in the air to see if the bat was going to go through them or was it going to hit him.
Right.
Because if it was going to hit him, then I knew I was being robbed. That was a different reaction you need. So in those moments, that happened mostly kind of when it was darker, when, like in the restaurant, when you can't see clearly because the light is gone.
Right.
But when the light is there and they show up, they look like those transparencies, those sheets that have the full color image, and you put it on the big light box and shine it on the wall.
Right, right.
You know, if you hold up the transparency, you can see all the detail that they've printed on it, from, you know, the watch, the color of the hair and everything, but you, oddly enough, see through it.
Right.
You can see the pattern on the wall right behind it.
That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, so you quickly learn that, okay, if I can slightly see what's behind you, then you are not, what I would call back then, you're not real. That would just help me feel better, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm thinking, you know, it's kind of annoying when you get woken up even when it's by a living person, so I can only imagine when it's someone wants your help. And who is this guy?
I had one boyfriend who moved in with me when I moved up to Atlanta, so I'm in my early 20s, and I told him, I was like, you probably don't want to move in with me because of this, you know, phenomena, and, you know, are you ready? And we moved into this place that it was extremely active. And my brother had lived in it before, but he was very hush-hush about it, and he said, no, you should move into this place. He only lasted 6 months, and he got out, so I took over the lease. And the spirits started waking up my boyfriend at night. And guess who started sleeping with the bat then? My boyfriend.
So your brother didn't tell you about this. Was he messing with you, or?
He shared a few stories with me, like in this place he had dropped a tray of ice, and he saw it topple over, so he went to the kitchen to get, you know, a towel and bring it back in. And when he came back in, all the ice cubes were in the tray and it was upright. And
wow.
So there were small things. The windows would open by themselves. I mean, it was a very physically active place, and there's a great story behind it, too.
Oh, really? What is it?
When I moved in, the man who kept waking me up at night, knocking on the doors, cranking the radios, opening my windows, I mean, just phenomena after phenomena, which some people are really entertained by it. It annoys me.
Well, is this the same place where you would go outside and then you come back in and the door would be locked? Or is that different?
Different house.
Okay, wow, okay. Okay, so go on, sorry.
Yeah, this one was my first apartment in Atlanta, and the spirit looked like Santa Claus wearing jeans and a red T-shirt. And he was big, and he had the gray hair and the gray beard, and it got down to the point where my boyfriend could only go to sleep if we closed our bedroom door and we locked it. And we locked the front door. We were on the second floor. You'd have to go down the flight of stairs, down the hallway to an outside door that locked. So we had 3 locked doors. And our bedroom door, somebody would knock on it. Bump, 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 bump. Just like, hey, get up. And it was on our bedroom door. And he'd be like, was that you? And I'm like, I'm promising I'm not screwing with you. And I was like, don't entertain it. Don't entertain it. You know it's him. And he was like, somebody's in our house. So he'd grab the bat and he'd open the door. And then when you stand in our living room, he would knock on our outside door. Knock, 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 knock. Really clear. Just like someone wants to come in. And I tell my boyfriend again, please don't entertain it. You're just feeding him. And he would get you outside. He would walk you all the way out by knocking and making sounds. So finally, I thought maybe it could have been a prank from downstairs. Even though you live your whole life dealing with this, you still think maybe some human is behind it. So I get the courage to go downstairs and talk to one of the flatmates and said, hey, are you getting knocking, or is things happening to you? And he was like, yes. And I said, well, I don't know if you know this, but I kind of see things. And I told him about the Santa Claus man, and he grabbed my hand and he says, come with me right now. And I was like, oh, okay. And he walked me outside of the house into the neighbor's house directly next door, and he's banging on the neighbor's door. And he's like, Jamie, tell the man what you just told me. And I was like, oh, well, I live in the upstairs apartment in the attic, and Santa Claus comes and wakes me up and hovers over my bed and harasses my boyfriend and my space and blah, blah, blah. And the man is like white. He said, well, back in the 80s, a Harley-Davidson group used to live in the house. And they would even start, fire in the backyard and sit around and clean their guns and talk about stories. And he said it was very alarming. I used to call the police on them all the time. Well, this one that looked like Santa Claus came home one day, found his girlfriend sleeping with one of his friends. So he shot the friend, he shot the girlfriend, and he shot himself. And the girl was a blonde-haired girl. She lived long enough to drag herself out of the house and up to the neighbor's house where we're standing. And he was able to call 911 and get the ambulance to come I don't remember if she lived or not, but the description I gave to the Santa man fit exactly the man who unfortunately used his gun to create an answer. So he asked me, he said, do you think that you could work with him? And I said, he doesn't want to be worked with. He's busy, stuck in his own story. The spirit does not want to cross over. He doesn't want to do anything. So my lease was up in 6 months. I was out of there.
Right. Wow.
I wasn't going to stay in that.
Yeah. Wow. So this happens to you all the time. So I was thinking about the moment in your book where you're talking about going to classes and kind of regaining the skills to be able to do this, and then you found that the very first thing that started to happen were some spirits were playing tricks in your house and locking you in the house, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
That spirit's name is Maitland, and I actually still work with her.
Oh, that was Maitland. Okay.
Yes, this is her calling card, is locking a door as soon as you've left it. And this isn't the lock that you carry keys for. These are like the deadbolts that you twist and turn,
right,
and they lock. And every morning I would go out to get the mail, do something, and come back. Not every morning she would lock it, but it was frequent. She'd bolt that door. And I figured out the pattern of how to get her to unlock it was to check every other door and window. So I'd have to go around the whole house, jump the fence, get in the backyard, go around the whole house, jump the other fence, and come back to the front door, and it'd be unbolted. And it was her funny little, I can touch things, have I got your attention? And after you get past that spook point where you know who's doing it, you know it's their calling card, you know they're saying hello, it was a little bit easier to handle, but that house still had a few other fun activities.
Yeah. It sounds like, so this whole time that you're going through this, can you describe for you, is it cool? Is it novel? Is it like freaking you out a little bit?
This was right at the beginning. I'm probably 18 to 20 years old and still just really trying to manage what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and what kind of interaction do I really want with them? Because they first started showing up, as people. And when you're in the house by yourself, I remember there was one time I was doing dishes and a man walked behind me and around peripherally and kind of through the wall. And I turned around and I had these plates in my hand and I'm like, don't come any closer. Like that was going to threaten him. But it's a human instinct to flare up and, you're confused. So he came back in and I threw a few dishes. I broke some things. Didn't faze him. I was the only one who was rowdy. I was the only one who was acting out. The spirits that were showing up in my life at that time were really ones that probably had just been with me the whole journey. But because I had chosen to listen to my mom's direction and say goodbye, that they weren't interacting with me anymore. I would say it was novelty. I liked some of it because I wanted to use a scientific viewpoint. Like, how is that happening? Why are my keys in the freezer? Because I know I didn't put my keys in the freezer. I hang my keys on a hook when I come in the door. And there was one day I came home and I hung my keys on the hook. And I went and, got ready for the evening. And I came back and my keys were still swinging. And I asked my two roommates, did you swing my keys? And they look at me like I'm weird. Like, what? Like, I'm going to get up off my butt and swing your keys? What? So I said, come into the kitchen. We all sat at the table and watched my keys swing for minutes on end, like with high force, because they're on a hook and a ring. And I went over and I checked and I felt all around it, and it was really cold, but no strings, no explanation of why it was happening. And as soon as we were all content with it, the keys just stopped. We're like, okay.
So you make it sound like that the earth is populated with spirits, and that, do you see them all the time? Or are they attracted to you?
I don't see them all the time anymore because I have learned how to turn them off. I have learned to respect people's privacy. When I was younger, I didn't really know that skill. And so if you were walking by me, I immediately wanted to know, what could I figure out about you? How could I shock you?
Okay.
What could I say to you to kind of make you go, whoa, that girl's, weird or whatever. But that was very invasive and very impolite. Now I know how to keep my skills to myself, keep my energy to myself, and let you be you and not see your people unless they're coming through so strong and they really need to say just something to you that they believe would help you release something, grow something, heal, just enhance you. And then sometimes, as I call it to my husband, I go, my lights are on. my lights just came on. I don't know why. And so I'll ask, what's going on? What do you need of me? And then, here comes a spirit with a voice and says, well, can you please call so-and-so or tell this or, and they'll come back and tell me twice, 3 times. And my rule of thumb is if they're coming back to me 3 times, if they're going to find a way to connect to me and give me the same message 3 times, then I'm going to pay attention to it. So.
Right. So when you do see people, it's usually, it's not like ghosts per se, but it's spirits that say are guiding or attached to another person, and you just happen to perceive. When you say, I'm seeing their people, can you elaborate on that?
I make the mistake of calling spirits people, so you'll have to correct me on that one.
Sure.
They look like people. So when I see the spirits, mostly they are associated to a human being that's alive. Explain it that way. And there are occasions, I was at the park a few months ago and saw this African-American man standing on the bridge, and I thought, wow, he's really tall. I like his jacket. Like, he just didn't look like he was modern. And I turn around to do something, I look back, and he's still there, and he turns and he makes eye contact with me, so I smile. Like, gonna be nice.
Sure, yeah.
And then he disappears. And so I'm grabbing my husband. I'm like, did you see the man on the bridge? Did you see the man? He was like, baby, nobody's on the bridge. It's just us. And I was like, wow, I wonder why he was on the bridge. Like, what was he doing? Just looking at the sights? I mean, it's a really pretty day. So sometimes you'll come across that. Just like the woman at Publix, helping me shop for grapefruits.
Right. She just happened to be there and saw you in the produce aisle and knew you need some advice. Well, the book, you talk a great deal about spirit guides and spirit helpers. Can you tell me what you mean by spirit guides, and can you elaborate on that?
I think there's so many different kinds of disembodied spirits that are helping us, guiding us, leading us, teaching us. And we have these spirits that I've noticed hang out with humans that are literally a guide, kind of like a guide dog. And they'll nudge and push in ways that the human can comprehend, whether it's touch, energy, dreams, vision, sounds, to get them to see life in a different way, to enhance their life. I have never come across an entity who is helping who has caused trouble. It just doesn't happen. And then you see these entities that are with people that are transient. They're not really, I'll ask them, I'm like, oh, I'm looking at Sally. Sally's in front of me, and the spirit shows up, and I'm like, oh, do you know Sally? And they say, no, I know of Sally. I'm here to help her through her cancer, but I am not part of Sally's life, or, they come in for a phase. They're kind of transient.
And they're not necessarily a relative per se. They're just a spirit that's coming through to help with the situation. Right. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, right. All the guides that are out there don't necessarily have to be ancestral, and they can even be from the other multiple lives that you choose to live, if you want to call it past lives or future lives. They can also be entities from other multiple dimensions. A lot of people like to call those aliens.
Okay.
They could be entities that really have not come to Earth, and I think a lot of people like to identify those as archangels or gurus or master teachers. Those are kind of the levels that I've seen in spirit that are engaging heavily with humans.
You seem to get a lot of advice from spirit. I was wondering if there are any rules about what they can and can't communicate to you. So, for example, in the book, they seem to give you profound advice about your life. Is there anything off limits for them to tell you?
I hope not for me. I have been explained that if a human is coming into a life and they really want to learn, let's say the joy of, this sounds pretty odd, but the joy of separation, because there's not that separation element in the beyond, or home is what they've taught me to call it, is home, heaven. And let's say that was part of what you craved to come back into a life to experience. They're not going to say to you, tell your friend not to leave until 10 more minutes, so that they won't get in the car accident and they'll live. Because part of what you and your friend have created is this experience of separation. And so it was, a lot of people call it a contract or a lesson. a destiny mark or something, but it is something that you have manifested for yourself to go through. And of course, you can always change that. You have free will. It's wonderful. You have free will on earth. You have free will in heaven and home. It exists across the board. But they wouldn't guide you away from what you yourself had wanted to experience. And a lot of times when I'm in a session with someone and they're asking a question, and I'll hear crickets. There's just nothing happening. And it's like, oh, man, tell me, like, don't leave me quiet. This is my job. I'm supposed to translate. And they said, no, we can't talk about this. Okay. And sometimes they'll explain why. This involves a lesson for you to grow exponentially. But if we explained it to you, you might mishandle it and miss the experience. So they leave it quiet. And I think it's really respectful of them.
Right. So there's not like a hard and fast Star Trek's prime directive where, they can't get involved, but there are certain times when they don't.
Correct.
So for example, you write your book, your memoir, and now you want to find an agent. Can you just say, put a bunch of agents list down on the table and say, Spirit Guides, who should I send my query letter to? Or is that cheating?
Not cheating.
Okay.
And yes, I have done that.
Okay. And so seriously, what advice did they give you? What did they tell you when you were going through that process?
I bought a book and I ran my hand over all the names. And I pulled out the top 25 hot names, how they would pull them out. And then I would ask them, who would help me best? Who would work with me? Who would respect me? I never asked who would publish me. It was just who would treat me the way that I want to be treated, who wouldn't alter my words. Right. And so they cut it down to 5. And, everybody has a great experience. And I was denied by all 5. I was denied by all 25. They kept encouraging me. Keep going.
So are they always accessible to you? Is it like, Siri, where you press a button and ask a question? Or is there certain times when you...
I've only had one moment where they have not been accessible, and I had a hysterectomy and was advised to take pain pills, and I don't do medicine so well. I have a very sensitive system, I guess you could say. And I took them, and all the lights and all the people went away. And I remember calling my dad crying. I was like, I'm alone. What do I do? I was like, I don't want to be this way. What if they never come back? And my dad was like, stop taking the medicine. And as soon as I quit, they were there again.
So there's never been a time when you've asked a question for your advice and there's been crickets, or has there?
They've always been accessible, and yes, there's been handfuls of times where they won't give me any advice. They'll just smile at me and tell me everything is going to be fine. I'm to go. And what's so crazy, Brian, when they talk to you and they say everything is fine, when our human mind hears that, we're like, okay, it's good, it's positive, it's safe. But for them, when they say the word fine, if you fall down a hole and break your leg and, smash your head open, but you still live, this, in their case, is still fine. Because it's part of your story, it's part of what you're supposed to be going through, and you're fine. Isn't that crazy? I love it.
That is crazy. That is crazy. It seems like, it's a little bit, I don't want to say cheating, but it's like, what a great tool. Why don't we all have that tool? I want that tool.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, exactly. Why don't we all have this tool? And when you slow down to really think about it enough, is it really cheating, or is it actually the way we are supposed to be living our lives? This whole conflict, cause, and effect that we've taught ourselves, and this whole concept of separation as being humans, maybe this is not what we were supposed to do at all. This whole intuitive sense that unfortunately we don't teach our children to use and to rely on, and that it's real and trustworthy, maybe this is the part that's missing. And having these cheat sheets is what I call them. Oh, I cheat sheet. I look at them and I see if they're lying to me. If they're lying to me, I know how to handle them. If they're being honest, I know how to handle them. So I get these cheat sheets. But maybe we're all supposed to be this way. Maybe it's holding us to a certain quality of life that we're robbing ourselves of because we're saying that not knowing is okay or lying is okay. That's for a flip side for you, huh?
Right. Oh, yeah. This is Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. I'm speaking with Jamie Butler, author of With Love and Light. Please join us for part 2 of the interview by clicking below.